No one in the city spoke her name without a twinge of awe or apprehension. Miranda Vale was more than a business icon. She was a storm wrapped in silk. By 40, she had built a luxury empire that stretched from glass-walled skyscrapers to exclusive resorts on 3 continents. Every magazine cover painted her as a visionary, but inside boardrooms she was known for something far sharper: an ability to crush competition with a single phone call. Investors angled for her approval, rivals kept their distance, and even politicians lowered their voices when she entered the room. Her power wasn't loud or theatrical. It was the kind that bent people's plans before they realized it. That afternoon, her newest triumph gleamed under the spring sun. A sprawling rooftop venue where the city's elite had gathered for a launch party. Chandeliers swayed in the breeze above white-clothed tables. Waiters moved like clockwork, carrying silver trays of champagne. Miranda stood at the center in an emerald gown that shimmered like water, every diamond at her throat a reminder of victories won. Conversation slowed as she passed. A subtle tilt of her chin directed entire teams of staff. Around her, laughter and music flowed, but nothing happened without her consent. People admired her, yes, but they also feared the stories. A supplier who'd missed a deadline and lost his company overnight. A board member who had dared question her and vanished from the industry a week later. To her peers, Miranda embodied the ultimate lesson: dominate or be dominated. And so, no one challenged her. Not the guests exchanging careful compliments. Not the journalists angling for quotes, not even the staff trained to become invisible. She had become, in every sense, untouchable. Yet beneath the glittering canopy of chandeliers and roses, a different current was moving. Among the servers weaving between tables was a young woman who did not fit neatly into Miranda's silent hierarchy. She was new, her uniform crisp but her eyes alert, carrying not just a tray but a quiet determination. She was a waitress, yes, but also a student with her own dreams, someone whose life had been built on grit instead of power. She had no idea that by the end of the night she would become the first person in years to look Miranda Vale directly in the eye, and not look away. The young woman weaving through the glittering crowd was named Sarah Carter, though tonight her name tag simply read, Staff. Her uniform, a crisp white blouse and navy skirt, wasn't glamorous, but she had pressed it herself at dawn to make sure it looked perfect. A thin band held back her dark hair, but a few strands escaped, softening her sharp, determined features. In her left hand she balanced a tray of champagne flutes. In her right she clutched a folded sheet of notes she had been reviewing between shifts, formulas, case studies, and probability graphs for the economics midterm she would sit the next morning. Sarah had grown up miles from the rooftop garden where she now worked. Her family ran a small grocery in a modest neighborhood, and most of her teenage years had been spent stocking shelves and calculating totals in her head. She had learned to work fast, smile even when tired, and memorize numbers before she could afford a calculator. Those habits had carried her through scholarships and late-night study sessions. They had also carried her to this job, weekend shifts at exclusive events that paid double the normal rate but demanded absolute discretion. From the moment she stepped onto the roof that afternoon, Sarah had felt the weight of the place. It wasn't just the chandeliers swaying above or the roses climbing trellises in perfect spirals. It was the atmosphere of wealth and authority, a kind of invisible current that guided how people stood, spoke, even breathed. She was used to being invisible, blending into the background with a practiced smile, but today felt different. The air crackled with anticipation. She told herself it was only nerves about her exam, but a deeper part of her sensed something was shifting. Her manager, a wiry man named Greg, had drilled the rules into her while pinning on her name tag. Serve quietly. Don't talk unless spoken to. Don't look anyone in the eye. And above all, don't draw attention to yourself. These people are important. We're just the backdrop. Sarah had nodded dutifully, but part of her bristled at the idea. She respected hard work and accomplishment, but she didn't believe that money alone made someone untouchable. Moving between tables, she caught fragments of conversations, mergers, venture funds, real estate deals. Numbers drifted past like drifting sparks. Most staff let the jargon slide, but Sarah's mind automatically calculated, compared, cross-checked. She could see patterns forming in the air as clearly as she saw the chandeliers above her. Near the main table, a group of men in bespoke suits debated an investment projection. One man gestured with his glass. 8% over 5 years. Guaranteed. Without meaning to, Sarah murmured under her breath, Closer to 12 if you compound it properly. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The table fell silent. A man pulled out his phone, tapped a quick calculation, then stared at her. She's right, he said, astonished. How did you? Sarah felt her cheeks warm. Just something I learned in school, she said softly and began to move on, but not before noticing a shift in the atmosphere. Heads turned. Eyes followed her. From across the garden, Miranda Vale stood like an emerald flame among the pastel suits. She hadn't caught the exact exchange, but she had noticed the ripple through the crowd. Her gaze narrowed, sharp as glass. For a moment, she saw not a waitress, but an anomaly, a point of defiance in a room designed for obedience. Sarah did not yet realize that her quiet correction had set a wheel in motion. She only knew her heart was beating harder, and that her tray felt heavier in her hands. Still, she straightened her shoulders, adjusted her grip, and continued to serve. She had survived far more exhausting nights than this. She had exams to pass, rent to pay, and a future to build. What she didn't know was that Miranda Vale's world had begun to tilt, and that before the evening ended, the lines between server and guest, between power and humility, would blur in front of everyone. The music on the rooftop shifted to a low, velvety rhythm as dusk slid across the city. Strings of bulbs blinked on one by one, casting a warm glow over glass tables and silver trays. Guests moved closer together, the hum of conversation rising like static. Somewhere behind the bar, a cork popped and a burst of laughter followed. From a distance, it looked like another flawless evening in Miranda Vale's empire. But near the heart of the party, something had shifted. Sarah sensed it in the way eyes followed her now, in the quick, curious glances from people who had never before looked at a server. Her small correction at the investment table had traveled faster than she could. She caught snippets as she passed. That girl, she knew the math. Sharp for a waitress. Compliments maybe, but also a subtle warning. In a room where everyone played a part, she had stepped off script. Across the terrace, Miranda Vale watched, still and silent, her emerald gown pooling around her like a tide. The woman had built her life on control, over markets, over people, over outcomes. Control was her weapon and her shield. Now a young server had disrupted the choreography of her event, and Miranda felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Curiosity laced with threat. Who was this girl? And why did her presence bother her more than hostile board members or tabloid headlines? Sarah tried to disappear back into the rhythm of service. Tray up, smile polite, eyes lowered. But the crowd's attention clung to her. Even Greg, her manager, kept glancing nervously toward Miranda. When Sarah set down a tray of champagne near the head table, she found herself only a few feet from the millionaire. Up close, Miranda's presence was even more striking. Flawless posture, cool diamond eyes, the faintest scent of jasmine. She radiated the kind of confidence that could silence a room without a word. Miranda spoke at last, her voice calm but edged like a blade. "You're new, aren't you?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said quietly. "They tell me you're good with numbers." Sarah hesitated. "I like math. I'm studying economics." A faint smile curved Miranda's lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Interesting. Most people here paid a great deal to be taught those skills. You, it seems, offer them for free." Several nearby guests chuckled nervously. Sarah kept her tray steady, unsure if this was praise or warning. "I just try to be helpful," she said. Miranda tilted her head. "Helpfulness is admirable, but accuracy can also be disruptive. Would you like to demonstrate your skill, since you seem so sure of your calculations?" The question landed like a challenge thrown across a chessboard. Conversations paused. Phones lowered. Even the string quartet hesitated for a beat before resuming. Greg shot Sarah a look that said, "Don't apologize, back away." But something in Sarah stiffened. She thought of late nights studying by a single lamp, of her parents' grocery shop, of all the times she'd been told to stay silent and small. She drew a careful breath. "If you'd like, ma'am," she said, "I'll try." Miranda gestured toward a table where several venture capitalists were gathered over a printed prospectus. "They're debating a portfolio for one of my foundations," she said. "The numbers are sensitive, but I'm sure someone with your talent could find an insight." Howard Grayson, Miranda's silver-haired advisor, slid the papers toward Sarah with a glint of amusement. "All right, young lady," he said. "If you're going to play, show us how you'd adjust this projection for market volatility over 10 years. The rooftop went quiet. All Sarah could hear was the faint clink of a glass somewhere behind her and the city's distant hum below. She set down her tray, smoothing the paper with steady fingers. Rows of numbers stared back at her, familiar patterns flickering to life. Monte Carlo simulations, hedging strategies, conservative yields. The concepts from her notes danced in her head. She looked up, meeting Miranda's gaze for the first time. "I'd model the risk distribution using a Monte Carlo simulation," she said, her voice calm but carrying. "Target a conservative 9%. Diversify assets to cushion downturns and rebalance quarterly to maintain stability. It sacrifices some upside, but you'll sleep at night even if the market turns." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Howard gave a low whistle. "She's right. That's solid," guests murmured approval. Someone began to clap softly. Sarah felt her pulse in her ears. Miranda's expression did not change, but a muscle in her jaw tightened. The moment she had intended as a trap had turned into an introduction, and the night was far from over. For a long second, the rooftop seemed to hold its breath. The only sound was the string quartet, bowing a slow waltz under the canopy of bulbs. Then the applause began, hesitant, scattered at first, but swelling as more guests joined in. Even the venture capitalists, notorious for their cold reserve, murmured to one another with nods of approval. A few lifted their glasses toward Sarah as if to toast her. Sarah stood with her hands clasped, her tray set aside. She had expected silence, maybe laughter, certainly dismissal. Instead, she felt the strange weight of admiration. It made her both proud and exposed, as though the walls she'd built around her quiet ambition had been peeled back in front of strangers. Across the terrace, Miranda Vale did not clap. She raised a hand instead, and the applause ebbed like a tide obeying the moon. Her expression remained serene, but inside a heat rose, not only anger but a deeper, less familiar sensation, being outmaneuvered in her own domain. She had built a life where no one dared contradict her, yet here stood a server who had matched her on the one field Miranda respected most: numbers. Howard Grayson leaned close to Miranda, his voice low but audible to a few nearby. "She's impressive, Miranda. Might even be an asset." Miranda's diamonds flashed as she turned her head slightly. "Assets are things you own," she said softly. "This one belongs to herself." Meanwhile, guests began drifting toward Sarah with questions and compliments. A woman in a dove-gray pantsuit asked where she'd studied. A man with a venture fund badge offered his card. Sarah accepted each with a polite smile, though her hands trembled slightly. She could feel Miranda's gaze like sunlight through glass, hot and focused. At the edge of the terrace, two society reporters compared notes in hurried whispers. "Waitress challenges Miranda Vale. Solves the problem in public." "Huge story," one said, already scrolling on her phone. The other grinned. "Headline writes itself." Greg, the catering manager, materialized at Sarah's side, his face pale. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "This isn't part of your job." "I didn't ask for it," Sarah whispered back. "She challenged me." Greg rubbed his forehead. "Then for heaven's sake, be careful. People like her don't lose gracefully." Back at the head table, Miranda lifted her glass but did not drink. She could feel her guests slipping away from her, their attention migrating toward the young woman she had tried to put in her place. It wasn't just irritation, it was recognition. She had once been that girl, sharp, hungry, underestimated, before she'd learned to use power instead of brilliance to win. Catching herself, Miranda drew a slow breath and stood. "Ladies and gentlemen," she called, her voice as smooth as ever. "It seems our evening has taken an interesting turn." The guests fell silent. "We've been treated to an impressive display of quick thinking, but let's not forget why we're here, to celebrate the opening of this venue and the generosity that built it." Her words were perfect, practiced, but they landed flat. People nodded politely, yet their eyes still flicked toward Sarah. Miranda's fingers tightened on the stem of her glass. For the first time in years, she sensed the limits of her control. Not a collapse, but a hairline fracture. Sarah felt it too. She didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. She simply picked up her tray again, ready to slip back into the crowd. But as she turned, a man in a navy suit stopped her. "You've got a head for business," he said quietly. "If you're looking for an internship, call me." He pressed a card into her palm. From her vantage point, Miranda saw the exchange. Her lips curved in a small, unreadable smile, This wasn't over. If the girl was as good as she appeared, Miranda would either bring her into the fold or teach her what it meant to stand alone against power. She didn't yet know which path she would choose. She only knew the night had changed. The string quartet began another song. Waiters moved through the crowd. But the rooftop no longer felt like Miranda's stage alone. Somewhere under the twinkling lights, a new story was taking shape. One where a waitress had proved she could stand in the same arena as a millionaire and not bow her head. When the last of the champagne glasses were cleared and the string quartet packed their instruments, Miranda Vale made a small gesture to her head of security. The man crossed the floor toward Sarah. "Miss," he said in a low voice, "Ms. Vale would like to speak with you privately." Sarah's pulse jumped. Every instinct told her to decline and disappear back into anonymity. But something steadier rose inside her, the same quiet courage that had made her answer the math problem on the terrace. She set her tray on the nearest table, wiped her palms on her apron, and followed him. He led her through a side door into a lounge that smelled faintly of cedar and leather. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the glitter of the city. Miranda was waiting by the bar, a glass of still water in her hand. Without the crowd, she looked even taller, more controlled, like a queen in her own court. "Sit," she said. Not a command exactly, but not a request either. Sarah sat on the edge of a low chair. She could feel the thickness of the carpet under her shoes, the hush of a room built for power deals. She folded her hands to keep them from trembling. Miranda studied her for a long moment. "You know," she said at last, "I built everything you see tonight from nothing. People dismissed me, underestimated me. They don't anymore." Sarah met her gaze. "I respect that. Do you?" Miranda's tone held a note of amusement. "Because out there you challenged me, in front of my investors." "I didn't mean to," Sarah said quietly. "You asked a question. I answered it. That's what makes it interesting." Miranda set down her glass and moved closer. "Most people in this city spend their lives waiting for a chance to impress me. You simply took it. That's either reckless or bold." She tilted her head. "Which is it?" Sarah hesitated, then said, "Maybe both." Miranda's eyes glinted. "Good answer." She leaned against the bar. "Tell me, what's your real plan?" "No one memorizes balance sheet ratios for fun." Sarah felt the old ache in her chest, the dream she had nurtured in silence while bussing tables and studying online classes late at night. "I want to start my own consultancy," she admitted, "for small businesses. My parents lost theirs because they couldn't afford advice that big firms charge for. I want to change that." For a moment, Miranda said nothing. The city lights reflected in her diamond earrings. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. "I recognize that fire. It's the same one I had." She walked around behind Sarah's chair. "But here's the thing about fire. It can warm a room or burn it down." Sarah turned slightly. "Why did you bring me here?" Miranda stopped, facing her now. "Because I have a test. A real one." She took a small envelope from her clutch and laid it on the table between them. "Inside is the profile of a company I'm considering acquiring. The numbers don't add up. Something's hidden. If you can tell me what by tomorrow night, I'll fund your first year in business. If you can't, you go back to waiting tables and you never mention this meeting again." Sarah stared at the envelope. It felt like a door swinging open and a cliff edge at the same time. "Why me?" she whispered. Miranda's smile was thin. "Because you're the only person tonight who showed me you might be worth the trouble." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the city below. Sarah reached out and touched the envelope, the paper cool under her fingers. She could feel her heart hammering, not from fear but from the sense that this was the moment her life tilted on its axis. "I'll do it," she said. Miranda nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Good, my driver will take you home." She turned away, already scrolling on her phone. "Tomorrow night, same time. Don't disappoint me." As Sarah left the lounge clutching the envelope, the hallway felt brighter, the air sharper. The rooftop was empty now, but she could still see in her mind the sea of faces, the applause, the moment she had spoken up. She had walked into this job a nameless waitress. She was walking out with a challenge from one of the most powerful women in the city. She wasn't sure if Miranda wanted to help her or crush her. Maybe both. But she knew one thing. She would open that envelope, she would work until dawn, and she would be ready. Because for the first time, she had a chance not just to answer someone else's question, but to change her own future. Back in her small apartment above a laundromat, Sarah spread the contents of the envelope across her kitchen table. Financial statements, supply contracts, payroll sheets, a labyrinth of numbers printed on thick cream paper. The hum of the washing machines below blended with the buzz in her head. It was already midnight, but she didn't feel tired. She felt alive. She brewed a pot of cheap coffee and began. Her laptop flickered with spreadsheets she built on the fly. She cross-referenced invoices, traced cash flows, compared vendor addresses. Somewhere inside these columns, Miranda had promised a hidden flaw. Sarah's pencil scratched margins full of notes, arrows, and circled figures. By 3 a.m., she found the first clue. A consulting fee, paid monthly to a shell company with no website and a P.O. box. By 5 a.m., she was sure. The shell company was owned by the CFO's brother. Money was being siphoned from the acquisition target, inflating costs and lowering apparent profit to drive down the sale price. Classic fraud disguised as routine expense. She leaned back, rubbing her eyes. Dawn smeared the sky gray through her window. She could go to bed, call in sick, stay safe. Or she could walk into Miranda Vale's world again and hand her the truth. The decision wasn't easy, but it was clear. She gathered her notes into a neat folder and got dressed. That evening, the rooftop was quieter than before, just a handful of people and a smaller staff. Miranda was waiting at a table set for two, a glass of still water in front of her. She looked as composed as ever, but her eyes flicked to the folder under Sarah's arm. "You came back," she said. "I said I would." Miranda gestured to the chair opposite her. "Then show me." Sarah opened the folder, sliding a summary page across the table. "The company you're looking at is bleeding money through a fake consultant. The payments go to the CFO's brother. It's fraud. If you acquire it at the listed price, you'll be paying for a hole in the ground." For the first time that Sarah had seen, Miranda blinked. Her fingers traced the edge of the page. "And you're sure?" "I've cross-checked the addresses and bank routing numbers. It's all there." She met Miranda's gaze. "I wrote out the corrective actions too. How to approach the board and how to recover the funds." Silence stretched between them. The city lights below twinkled like a circuit board. Finally, Miranda exhaled. A soft sound that might have been a laugh. "You did in one night what my due diligence team hasn't in 3 weeks." Sarah didn't smile. "You asked for the truth." Miranda folded the paper slowly. "You realize what you've just handed me could ruin a very powerful man." "Maybe," Sarah said quietly. "But it could also save hundreds of employees if you expose it before the deal closes. That matters more." Miranda looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in her eyes. "You're dangerous," she said at last. "Not because you're wrong, but because you can't be bought easily." "I'm not looking to be bought," Sarah replied. "I'm looking to build something." Miranda's lips curved. "Then build it. I keep my promises." She reached into her bag and set a sleek black card on the table. "This is the account. 1 year of seed funding. Mentorship if you want it. But be warned, once you take it, you step into my world. There's no going back to anonymity." Sarah stared at the card. Her hands didn't tremble this time. She understood now that Miranda wasn't simply testing her intelligence. She was measuring her courage and her integrity, and Sarah realized she wasn't afraid. "I'll take it," she said. Miranda leaned back, a genuine smile flickering at the corners of her mouth. "Good. Then let's see how far you can go." The string quartet struck up a soft melody again. In the distance, the city hummed with endless possibilities. Sarah felt the weight of the past night lift from her shoulders. She had walked into a trap and turned it into a door. Whatever came next, she would step through it on her own terms. The following months blurred into a storm of meetings, prototypes, and late-night planning sessions. Sarah had expected Miranda's seed funding to come with a leash, but instead it came with a mirror. "If you're going to build," Miranda told her, "build on your own values. Otherwise, you're just another transaction." The words stayed with Sarah as she sketched business plans on her kitchen wall and pitched investors she once only read about in magazines. She was no longer just a waitress or a student running numbers in the shadows. She was a founder, shaping something tangible with her own hands. Her startup, a platform combining data science and supply chain ethics, launched quietly at first. She hired 2 friends from university, then a handful of interns, then an experienced operations manager. Every step she took forced her to confront the same question Miranda had asked. What do you stand for when no one's looking? When suppliers cut corners, Sarah refused the easy profits. When investors pressured her to pivot to flashier ideas, she showed them the hard numbers and kept the mission steady. Slowly, respect followed. Across town, Miranda watched. She didn't interfere, but her presence hovered like a silent challenge. In boardrooms, people whispered about the waitress Miranda discovered as though Sarah's story were a myth. Some doubted she'd last a year. Others feared she would. By the time her company landed its first major contract, a logistics overhaul for a national retailer, Sarah had already proven them wrong. The day the deal closed, she returned to the rooftop where it had all begun. The chandeliers still swayed above, but this time she wasn't carrying a tray. She stood at the edge, looking out over the skyline, her own name now appearing in trade journals alongside Miranda's. Behind her, footsteps approached. Miranda, in a charcoal suit instead of an emerald gown, joined her. "You've built something real," Miranda said quietly. "Not many do." Sarah turned, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I didn't just want to prove you wrong. I wanted to prove myself right." Miranda studied her for a long moment. "Do you know why I tested you?" Sarah shook her head. "Because power without conscience is hollow. I wanted to see if you'd compromise to get ahead. You didn't, that makes you rare." Miranda's expression softened. "And now you're no longer under my shadow. You're your own force." They stood in silence, the city spread below like a map of possibilities. Sarah thought of the girl she'd been, exhausted, invisible, slipping notes behind napkin stacks, and felt an almost physical distance from her. She also felt gratitude. Without that long night of doubt and sleepless work, she might never have discovered the depth of her own resilience. "You taught me something too," Miranda said finally. "That no empire is untouchable, not even mine. That's why you'll do well." Sarah extended her hand. "Thank you for the chance." Miranda shook it firmly. "You earned it." As the sun dipped and the first stars pricked the sky, Sarah felt a quiet surge of resolve. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a different kind of power, one built on knowledge, ethics, and courage. People would still underestimate her. They would still whisper about the waitress who challenged the millionaire. But from now on, she would write her own narrative. She stepped away from the railing, phone buzzing with messages from her growing team. The future was waiting, not as a gilded hall to be served in, but as a landscape to be shaped. And Sarah, once the invisible server in the background, walked toward it with steady steps ready to lead. 2 years later, the city's business press no longer called Sarah the waitress who challenged the millionaire. They called her the architect of change. Her company had grown from a single rented office to a glass-walled headquarters buzzing with engineers, analysts, and young leaders she personally mentored. She still wore simple clothes and still carried a notebook full of formulas. But now she stood at the front of auditoriums, explaining how ethical innovation could also be profitable. At one such conference, Miranda sat quietly in the front row. No entourage, no emerald gown, just a woman watching someone she once tested now outshining her. When Sarah stepped off stage, the applause was thunderous. Reporters leaned forward to capture every word of her closing remark. "Power isn't about crushing others," she said. "It's about lifting ideas and people until they stand on their own." Afterward, Miranda congratulated her. "You've built more than a company," she said. "You've built a standard," Sarah smiled. "I only did what someone once dared me to do, be bold enough to tell the truth, and disciplined enough to follow through." That evening, back at her modest apartment, kept as a reminder of where she began, Sarah opened a letter from a young waitress who had heard her story. It spoke of double shifts, late-night studying, and a dream of starting a business one day. Sarah read it twice, feeling a warmth in her chest. She picked up her pen and wrote back, offering mentorship, just as Miranda had offered her, standing at the window, looking over the same city skyline that had once felt unreachable. Sarah realized the cycle had turned. She was no longer simply a challenger of power. She was a builder of it, shaping a new kind of leadership that left room for others to rise. The girl who had slipped notes behind stacks of napkins had become a beacon. The legacy was no longer Miranda's alone. It belonged to every quiet fighter who chose courage over compromise. And as the night lights glittered below, Sarah felt certain of one thing. This was only the beginning.